Hi, welcome to Academic Mark Insights. I'm Russell Rhodes, joined by Dr. Larissa Demiak. We are doing another episode of Floor Tales here. The first couple have been folks that I had previous relationships with. This is Larissa's turn. So, with that, I'm going to turn things over to her. She's going to introduce our guest, and then we're going to hopefully hear some funny stories about the floor eventually.
So I'm super excited to introduce Jared and Russell to each other. This is the first time they've ever met, but Jared and I worked together at a company called Peak Six. They had opened up a wing called Financial Markets Education, and we were both very fortunate to work for Joe Taraclo. But before Jared had come to Peak Six, he had done a world of different things. So he was a floor trader, and then he became a daily host of a television show, and he even won an Emmy for it, which is like unbelievable, right? I mean, Jared, if I were you, I'd be walking around with that thing everywhere, right? Like
The
it's
whole
just one of
team.
those things.
I try to keep a humble approach. I mean, it was a pretty cool. I didn't realize the gravity of what was happening in my life at the time. Everything was kind of a whirlwind. But thank you for that. That's very
Yeah,
sweet.
no, and just so you know, we're all into promoting ourselves.
Horrible
You
at
do
that.
not need to be humble on this show. It's amazing accomplishment.
Thank you.
And your work came because you were able to break down options, what was happening in the options markets, and you were able to break it down for people like our number one fan, right? So people who really wanted to understand and get into it and get trading ideas, and the excitement and energy you brought to it was just phenomenal. So we're just excited to have you on the show and to hear your stories. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Very kind words. I hope I can live up to the expectations of
And
all
we're
that. I got to keep my
gonna
excitement
say
going.
Emmy performance,
I got
right?
a double shot of espresso to keep things going this morning.
So typically, we just start out with how did you in we're speaking to people that have that former floor experience that you just can't get anymore,
Right.
and different people end up there through different circumstances. We're just kind of curious, what was that path for you? And if it's happened to be walking by the Merc one day and had 20 minutes to kill and went up to the viewers gallery and said, I want to do that, or something that was better planned than that.
I as a kid, I kind of had two dreams. One was to be a fighter pilot, and the other was to be a trader of some sort. And I they came from movies. The first one was, trading places, and then it was Top Gun. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah,
It's like,
sorry to interrupt, and I'm terrible like this, but one of the previous episodes, I said I can't wait until somebody mentions trading places as the inspiration.
Yes. So
We
well
knew it
done.
was coming. That's where our
what?
reaction was. Sorry.
Right? I mean, I just wanted to do that. I wanted to wear a funny jacket and scream at people all day long, is the truth. And it was just the intensity of it aligned really well with my persona, which I am hyperactive, obviously, or maybe not so obviously if you don't know me. And I just I love the way the world works. I was always fascinated with money. My father sort of talked me out of being a professional pilot, and the military. His experience with the military is much different. I remember going to the floor with a family member when I was young, and this is up in the New York Stock Exchange, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" I'm like, "This is it." And again, this is the heyday. This is still late '80s, '90s. It's still just humming down there. And I started off. I was very young. I graduated high school at 16. And I just got myself immersed in the financial industry. I'll share this on here because it's part of my past. I ended up working for one of Jordan Belfort's companies to start off with. I was like 18. I moved to Florida. I was trading their money. I wasn't like a salesperson. They put me on the trading desk, but I remember looking around like something's really shady here. I only stayed there for 6 months. I came back and I ended up my neighbor was worked for was Dean Witter, and he had a friend who was a trader on the floor of the Philadelphia Stock Exchange. And I was like, "Hey man, and I bugged him so much because I was like, "Hey, would he hire me?" I'm like, "I'll work as a clerk." Da, da, da. And he kind of blew me off. We had met, very nice man. I mean, and blew me off in the nicest of ways. Anyway, I kind of got into some financial advising and and I just kept bugging him. And then I met another guy who was a trader on the floor of the exchange in Philly. And I was like, hey, I'm talking to this guy, Wayne. And I'm like, is there anything you could put a good word in for me? Because he had known me a little better. And again, luck struck. I think I'm like 20 years old at this point, and Wayne's like, hey, we just expanded our firm. Do you want to come down and clerk for me? And I'll pay you nothing or whatever. I mean, it was literally like nothing. And he was trading Dell Computer, which was the biggest pit in Philly at the exchange. And, brings me in, and I'm just like, oh my God. And then from there, it's just network, network, network. And fortunately, he ended up going because the queues had started to trade. This is just the beginning of the NASDAQ 100 now. And he went up to New York and he's like, hey, go ahead and you could trade for me here. And I don't really clerked for a few months. He's like, do you want to go trade? I was like, yes. Yeah. And I had good trading knowledge from before. I had created some indicators using Omega Research's TradeStation. Anyway, he had I remember that. And I knew options, but not like as a market maker. So he like throws me down there and they gave me like a book and I had to watch. We cleared first options in Chicago. And was it Marty? Who did the videos, the educational videos?
Marty Kearney. He's my
Yes.
Marty Kearney. He hired me at the Options Institute.
Oh,
This is about you, not about me, but I didn't want to.
The man was amazing. I just remember watching his VHS tapes, what is he talking about? And they gave me the books. And I'll be honest with you, in the beginning, I had no idea what I was doing. Absolutely. I'm just like, he's like, raise your hand, keep yourself delta neutral. I'm like, okay. And literally it was just, and what I realized every time I raised my hand was like $5,000 to $10,000.
Wait, I have a question for you real quick.
Yes.
For our number one fan, what does it mean to be delta neutral?
Good question. So, as market makers, we take different, you can take different types of risk, right? You can say, all right, I believe in this case, Dell Computer is going higher. And that would mean that I would want to be long delta. I have a directional opinion on the underlying stock. What our firm did was we really wanted to create or capture, if you will, what's called edge or arbitrage. So in other words, mispricing in the markets. So for us, it wasn't about taking a bet on which way the stock was going. It was like, okay, do the option trade, and then immediately, if you're buying calls, sell stock against it. Just reduce your directional risk. Because remember, markets are going up and down. For us, it was about, again, trying to capture mispricings in the market and or take advantage of flow. So delta neutral, no directional price bias.
So if it goes up or goes down, we're neutral. Is that where the neutral comes in?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot more complex, as we know, there's a lot more complexity to that because, things can change, everything's dynamic. But yes, coming out of the end of the day, I could not have any delta risk. I couldn't have any directional risk. And by the grace of God, and I don't know who else, the trading gods and Eddie Murphy, I made money. And I made good money for some reason. I still to this day don't know how. But after a few months, I started to figure things out. And then they asked me, they're like, hey, do you want to go to New York? And I'm like, sure.
Yeah.
I was taking the bus, the Greyhound bus, because I lived still in Philadelphia. I hadn't purchased a place in New York. And I would commute and take a bus from like Mount Laurel, New Jersey. First, I took the Chinatown bus and go to work at the American Stock Exchange, which is where kind of things took off. I started off trading Cisco there, and then within a few months went into the Q pit as well. And again, this is still the early days of the Qs. It was, oh my God, it was the Wild West, And we are now in the dot-com boom of the late 90s, mid to late 90s. I mean, it was just absolute fever. Men were wearing diapers because they didn't want to leave the floor. I know we're really veering off of how I got my start, but and that was that. Yeah.
You are dead on with what we were shooting for. Larissa always likes to ask for number one fan. I'm going to ask the two questions real quick.
Okay.
So one is, for clarity's sake, I know who Jordan Belfort is. Larissa knows who he is. Some people explain who he was and what movie was based on him, and I think that gives a lot more clarity when you looking around. And then the other thing is explain the cues. And were you trading the cues when it was 4 cues and not 3?
Yes.
That's old.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so let's start with Jordan Belfort.
Jared, you look great. You don't look a day over 27.
Right,
So,
it's a lot of good skincare. A lot of good skincare. Frankly, a glass of wine every night. It works. I don't know, maybe some other things. So Jordan Belfort, if you guys heard about this movie, and you probably did, The Wolf of Wall Street, that was Jordan. He created a firm called Stratton Oakmont. Didn't have the best reputation, but the guy understood people in a way that you could not imagine. I remember going to this firm and he had a book, like I think they showed it in the movie, the rebuttal book, where they'd call somebody would say something like, "Oh no, I got to talk to my wife," and you'd flip to the page. It says, "I got to talk to my wife," and there were 20 things you could say to turn that person around. By the time I got there, Stratton had kind of fallen apart, and his underlings had started off these other firms, and they were just looking for young, hungry. Again, I got connected through a friend of a friend who said I was a good trader, which again, I'm like 19 or 18. I'm like, I could be a good trader. And yeah, I went to work for him, and the rest is history. When the movie came out, it's weird. I mean, I will tell you this: the things you see in the movie are understated. Let's just put it that. And that movie to watch it, you're like, oh my God, is this real? And I'm like, it is understated from what I saw. And I wasn't there in his heyday, which was the 80s. So that's Jordan. What was the other?
with the cues.
Cues. So the NASDAQ 100,
And what is NASDAQ 100? Again, for a number one fan.
Yeah. So it's a collection. Remember, the internet was literally just in I want to say its infancy, but it's big uptake, right? And a couple very smart minds got together and like, how can people take advantage of these stocks, these concentrated? You had the NASDAQ itself, but these 100 names are kind of the biggest, brightest, and best of the NASDAQ. They were the tech titans, right? And that was an unbelievable pit. It was the busiest, most violent, most intense pit that I had seen. I know in Chicago there's some pretty intense ones. We had the NASDAQ 100 futures, which traded upstairs. I did that for a little while, but I'm more of an options guy. So I was down in the main options pit, which was downstairs. And it was the biggest pit by far. I mean, guys would get there at 4 a.m. to get a spot, and you wanted to be near the telephone. Yeah, because you wanted to be near the telephones where the brokers would come in and they pick up the phone. I mean, I'm telling you, this is old. We had pagers, and guys it was such a busy pit. Remember, it's the center of everything going on. Everybody is making their money in the NASDAQ. And I guess the analogy today is like everybody's flooding into AI and those funds. But back in the day, there weren't that many choices. You had it, and that was the NASDAQ 100. Lots of stories about that pit.
Are there any like really good stories that you can share with us? Keeping in mind students watch this.
There's one. There's a lot of them. There's one that I thought was particularly. It's even funnier now. So Martha Stewart, her company, Omni Media, Martha Stewart Living Omni Media. Anyway, she was bringing it. They began trading options for her on this day. The NASDAQ had plummeted. I think it was like 8% in a day. It was some nasty, nasty sell-off. And remember, options trade until 4:15. Index options there. So Martha Stewart is up there. She's got all of her nice. It's all floral. And they're like, and they're trying to make an announcement. By the way, the queues are going bonkers. They're trying to make an announcement, and Martha Stewart's up there, and like literally 10 traders are like, shut up. They're yelling at Martha. We don't care about your stupid cooking. I was like, oh my God. And they just like, shut her up. And we just kept going. And people were just yelling at poor Martha, who's trying to ring this bell. It was ruthless. I mean, it was absolutely ruthless. That, and then the story of it was such a moneymaker for so many traders that, like I said, you get there early to get your spot, and you didn't leave. Because to leave, you might sacrifice tens of thousands, if not more money, especially when things are moving fast. And literally, like traders started wearing like diapers, like adult diapers. And I remember the exchange, they had to institute like a rule, like diapers, you gotta, it was nuts. Yeah, but
So your pit smelled like an old folks home.
that's exactly what it did.
Sorry, man. I just couldn't help that.
We had a cologne clerk who would go around.
Sorry.
He would spray people because it was just nasty. I'm like, what?
Sorry. I wasn't expecting that.
You're like you worked in the only place that smelled worse than the subway.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah. Typically, one little question and we got a little bit of extra time here, so I'm going to take a right turn on you. And this is very relevant to you because you were trading in the NASDAQ 100 ETF or the QQQs or QQQQs. Which I don't know. I have no clue why they changed that symbol, but I say that, and actually I do. But you were in a pit that was that could experience an awful lot of volatility. And were you down there for any of those days that we talk about the anniversary of, or anything like that?
Yes, for sure. So I had switched firms. So again, I was kind of an independent. We had a small from the beginning, and I went to work for a larger group headed by John LaRock, who's a pretty big time OEX trader and a few. And I went from being what we call 5 up, 10 up, 20 up and upwards, trading 10 or 20 options on each side, to being 1,000 or 2,000 up. Which means, I would be willing to buy or sell 1,000 or 2,000 lots of options. And that's a lot. That's a lot at stake. That's a lot of money. It's at the time I didn't.
Sorry, I want to interject. Why is that a big size for the number one fan?
When you get to the notional of it,
yeah.
So remember, one options contract represents 100 shares of stock, or in this case, index. And I think the NASDAQ 100, this is a very long time ago. It had to be like 100, somewhere around 100. It's
been a 3-digit ETF for a long time. Yeah. And then, if you're talking pre-internet crash, it was really high. It was easily each share was easily $100 easily.
Right. So take that times 100 times 1,000. You're in the millions of dollars. It just starts to get
very big.
And when it's moving fast, so remember, we're doing this trade, and immediately at the time we had this is very old. I'm on with my clerk. He's on with our hedgers, which are on in Chicago. We had like a 3-way call going.
Oh yeah,
all day. And this is the beginning of computers on the floor, which they just started to allow, that were plugged in. And we would get swings, and sometimes we're like, good trade, that we just made whatever it was, $80,000, or oh my God, that sucked, we just lost 150. It was that, and it happened quite frequently. For us, understanding, you would watch and kind of see this. I don't want to get too technical here, but we could see the futures moving, and that would depend on which side of the trade I would favor, right? So I might be 10 up on one side, willing to buy, offering 1,000, right, to make. But those moments were scary, and they were scary for me. And I remember, I got a call and had to go up to Chicago and explain myself because I didn't fully understand the process. And I'm like, why did you do these things? And I'm like, I was just trading around I wasn't necessarily what we call box monkey at that time, but
yeah.
Here's your theoretical value, which I used to have to create my own theoretical value. And here they're kind of giving it for us, through these computers, which was great. And I was just trading around that, but obviously there was a lot more to it, and pretty quickly figured out, the ways to dance around using that kind of size.
Cool.
And how were you able to sleep at night?
Well, if you're delta neutral, you can sleep at night.
Is that how you were able to go to bed every night? Because
Drinking.
I want to interject here. I think Jared said drinking. They're really basically because of the stress of the floor, you've got one of two reactions to it. You work out like a madman after work, or you drink, or you work out like a madman and then you go to the bar and drink. But it does create extremes off the floor as well.
I did both of those. I would say to chaos. What I didn't understand. And like my girlfriend, she's like, "You're so just chaotic at times," and I realized that she's like, I'm like, "Hun, we made decision, like literally like life changing. The money that exchanged hands in one day could literally set someone for life or take their life away." I would say that the coping mechanisms you were discussing are true. I worked out, but I went and I partied. And
Mhm.
I'll be honest with you, I think I kept myself kind of numb for those 4, 5, 6 years. And then obviously September 11th was another layer. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of that, and a
Were
lot
you
of
in, yes,
just
for 9/11, were you in Philadelphia or were you in New York when that happened?
well, and this is another story that I was mad at the time. Now, at that time, I was promoted to kind of a manager, so I was running both New York and Philadelphia's floors.
Okay.
And I would go back and forth. I had a place in New York at the time and a place in Philadelphia. And that morning, I had gone out the night before for my birthday because my birthday's September 10th,
Oh,
and got slammed drinking. Got home at like 4 in the morning. And I remember calling Chicago, and I was just like, and again, it's just September,
mhm.
we thought who knew would have knew. And I was like, "Lay, I'm not coming up to the city today. Like, I'm not going up to New York." He's like, "All right, could you go down to the Philly Exchange? It's just, we need you to check some risk." At the time, we were the market makers for Krispy Kreme donuts,
Okay.
which was a
Oh,
big,
that's a volatile one.
it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
I
remember
remember.
walking down to the Philly Exchange, and right as I'm walking down, it was dead solid, and everybody's heads are just kind of up, and there's a few TV screens, and yeah, it was literally the first time
Hmm.
the first plane that hit, and
Jared, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I know our subscribers would get a lot out of this. I know my students will get a lot out of this. And I know the number one fan also appreciated you breaking down what some of those different things are. And to the people who have watched this video, we thank you so much for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like. Remember, my kids like it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you can see more of our floor tales. With that, thank you so much.